Hey, folks, it is April the 16th, and day progress reports are supposed to go out. How do the people at home get the progress reports? Do they mail them to you? Or?
I guess it's online. Usually whenever you come up to the school.
So they wait till you come out to the school. Okay. So one day you'll get it. Today we're going to go through 4 more slides of information regarding the presidency of George Bush Sr., and also we're going to be introduced to Bill Clinton. And then hopefully when we come back next time, we can finish Bill Clinton and make it up to my end goal of 9/11. And then after that, it's going to be reviewing until the EOC. Then after the EOC, it's probably just going to be more fun, generic kind of history stuff because we'll have the test stuff covered. All right, so let me see. I am going to have to update the notes in the Google Classroom because I haven't saved this as a PDF yet. So you have to bear with me. All right, so we left off last time. We were talking about the Soviet Union had promised that it would stop telling the countries it was controlling what to do, and that they would be less violent, and that they wouldn't install governments. And so we're going to see that because they have said that they will not use violence or force, their empire is going to fall apart because it wasn't built by like part of the Soviet Union. The only reason it was together is because people were afraid that if you tried to break away, they would kill you. They would use their army, they would use assassins or something like that, or they'd put you in jail or prison for the rest of your life. And so once the people weren't afraid anymore, they left it. And so that's a picture of the fall of the Berlin Wall. On November the 1989, crowds of Germans assembled at the Berlin Wall, at the eastern side, the German side, and had the gates open. They told the guards to open the gates, and there were so many thousands of people there. The guards just did it. And so then people from both sides started dismantling the wall. They started tearing it down bit by bit with sledgehammers, whatever they had. And you're going to see that because of this, the governments there are going to, well, especially the eastern one's going to dissolve, the one that was essentially controlled by Soviets. By the next year, East and West Germany reunited into one country as Soviet control collapsed. So now Germany was one country again. And you got to remember, it hasn't been one country since the end of World War II. So that's over 40 years where they're just they were split apart. And of course, at first it was for good reason. I mean, the Nazi Germany did a lot of things that horrified the world. And they were just so powerful and they were so close to being successful. But these are people, many of these people were 2 generations removed from that war. They had nothing to do with Nazis or any of that stuff. They're like the kids and the grandkids, like they couldn't help where they were born. And so it was unjust. In 1989, the U.S., now this is closer to home, invaded a country called Panama after its head general conspired with local drug lords to ship cocaine to the U.S., and he then took over his country's government. And so this guy was Noriega. And so Noriega is going to take over his government, and he's going to work with these drug lords. And this is all during something that we have going on that started prior to the 80s, but it's going to get stronger in the 80s, called the War on Drugs. And this is where you're going to have like DARE and programs like that. Just Say No to Drugs was a big slogan. And parts of our CIA and our military are actually going to be used in South America to fight drug cartels and stuff like that, especially in Colombia, trying to curb in the shipment. And they're also going to make very strict laws regarding drugs. So it's during this time period where things like cocaine and marijuana are really going to be cracked down on. But it's going to be very different, though, than like prohibition, because prohibition, it was illegalized with the Constitutional Amendment. Whereas where you see illegal drugs today, they actually adopted, I think, United Nations protocols and then adopted them as American law during the Nixon administration. But yeah, so we see that there is like, and the reason is because there's like drug-related violence in inner cities regarding cocaine. You're going to see the invention of crack, and that's going to like turn a lot of neighborhoods into war zones from like drug dealers and drug gangs. Violent crime in the 80s is going to be a much higher cause of death than it is today. Much more, especially young men, are going to die from either knife fights or gunshots or just fist fights than today by any standard. So it was a pretty violent time, and a lot of it was drug fueled. So people were trying to fix this problem. Later in 1990, former U.S. ally and Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein invaded its oil-rich neighbor, Kuwait. So I said he was an ally. Well, I remember 2001 when I was in the Army. This guy was like he was our biggest enemy, right? Like up there with Osama bin Laden. Well, before this time, we actually helped Saddam Hussein neighbor Iran. Remember, we were super mad at Iran, but we couldn't really find a way to get back at them after we had our hostages freed. And so we were still very bitter that they had this revolution, and then they'd sworn to get back at us. And so Saddam Hussein agreed to get into a war with Iran. And it was a long, drawn-out war, and it was terrible. Lots of soldiers on both sides died. And it was a brutal war, too. They were using poison gas on each other. Just young men just like wasting their lives. And it drew to a stalemate. But Saddam Hussein spent so much of his country's money on it that he went into debt. And then the price of oil dropped, which was really their only commodity to get money. And so Saddam left his country heavily in debt following the drawn-out war with Iran, and saw this invasion of Kuwait as a way to relieve that debt. They essentially invaded Kuwait to rob it. So Kuwait is a little small kingdom that's super, super rich from its oil money. And Kuwait was part of something called OPEC that played with oil prices. So Saddam saw this as a way to get back at them for messing up his oil wealth. And also he saw it as a way to essentially take some cash. And so when the soldiers went there, the Iraqis, they were just looting places left and right, because the people in Kuwait lived like very wealthy individuals, modern amenities. Whereas a lot of Iraqis, even to this day, they don't even have functioning toilets. Like a common thing in Iraq is they'll basically have a hole in the wall people do the bathroom out of. Like it'll be like in the kitchen or something like that. So, I mean, I'm serious. It's still like that today in lots of Iraq. Yeah, it's like they'll just out the window, you know, and just kind of go on the street. So, I mean, yeah, like out of the kitchen and stuff. Yeah, like the streets are just like, yuck, you know. So, of course, you know, they haven't had like they didn't really have like good amenities. They had like electricity and running water, but things like sewage weren't always that well. So I mean, that's how it is in that part of the world. I mean, you don't really find things like toilets that often and stuff. So, but they went to Kuwait, they saw all this stuff, and they're like, wow, everybody's so rich. And they were just gathering up all the loot they could, gold, TVs and all that stuff, and literally loading them on the trucks to bring back home. So it was kind of like a pirate army when you think about it. But the thing is, Kuwait was good friends with a country called Saudi Arabia. And America and Saudi Arabia were very tight because Saudi Arabia essentially helped us out a lot with our oil resources. And America has always seen Saudi Arabia as maybe a wedge that could help prevent violence against Israel. So there's always been like this strong bond where we're trying to not get on the bad side. So Saudi Arabia basically says, America, will you please get them out? And if you do, we'll pay you. So the king of Saudi Arabia actually offered to pay for the U.S. military. And this is it's going to be a very fast war when we get involved. There's going to be very little ground fighting because our tanks and our air force is going to completely annihilate Saddam's army. This is called the Highway of Death. When Saddam's army tried to flee, we strafed our bombers over it and essentially just turned the whole thing into ash. It was basically within minutes, Saddam's army was just gone. So on one hand, we annihilated their army. But on the other hand, they were running away. So it's going like, okay. So Iraq's invasion of Kuwait was immediately recognized as an international crisis. Most of the nations in the world said, you can't do that. You can't just invade countries. That's what Japan did. And remember, Germany did back before World War II. We try not to do that anymore. It's just for money, essentially. You can't do that. It's not the Middle Ages. So I immediately recognized the international crisis as Britain and several Middle Eastern countries mobilized their militaries. They're like, we got to do something. In 1991, Congress authorized an armed response for America as 34 nations joined us in what would be Operation Desert Storm. So this is what we call a coalition, right? So us and some of our partner nations decided to do something about this. The conflict lasted for 42 days as thousands of Saddam's troops either surrendered or were killed. And around 100,000 Iraqi soldiers and civilians were killed in this. And I think a handful of Americans, and I mean like a handful, like dozens. The U.S. then chose to not invade Iraq, but instead encouraged the locals to rebel against Saddam while isolating the country. So we played with the idea of invading Iraq and unseating Saddam. And that's going to be a political issue for a long time, where some politicians are like, well, why are we still involved with Iraq when we already made them go home? And some politicians are like, maybe we need to just invade and get rid of Saddam Hussein. And this is going to go on all the way up until the invasion of Iraq after 9/11. And so, so George Bush Sr., he's going to tell a lot of the Iraqis, hey, you need to stand up for your freedom, overthrow your government. The U.S. will help you. And a people called the Kurds who live in northern Iraq actually did that. They rebelled against Saddam Hussein. But then he used poison gas on their cities, killed a lot of their women, their children, a lot of their civilians, just poison gas. It was terrible. But we didn't help them. And so that was where we kind of dropped, we dropped the ball on that. We're going to come back in Iraq later and help the Kurds out. But then when we left, then ISIS started going in. So it's like, they're constantly offered help, and then we withdraw and kind of leave them dry. So it stinks. All right. So with these military victories behind him, however, because, we have Panama, we got rid of that drug lord. And then here we liberated a country. They were invaded. We gave them their freedom. Bush Sr. then faced his next challenge with the election of 1992. And the polls at this time, he had like a 90% approval rate. People liked him now. Yeah, he raised taxes and all this other stuff. People were like, wow, he's a commander in chief. He was a World War II hero, and he can certainly lead us into victory. But the problem is we still have this huge military, like the biggest in the world, and the Cold War is ending. The Cold War's over, so our big enemy's gone. And so that's expensive. It's expensive, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. There is some economic gain from having a powerful worldwide military. You can help keep things like piracy down. You can scare people away from having war. But it can be really expensive too. So in the 90s, that's going to really hit until deficit gets fixed. All right, got two more. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right. Hey, does anybody know who these three guys are? Clinton. Okay, yeah, so Clinton, who's this guy on the left?
That's Bush.
Yeah, that's Bush. Who's the guy in the middle?
Nixon.
No, Nixon's alive still, but no, wait, for real? Well, during this one.
Oh.
He's dead.
Oh, okay.
This guy, he's a Texas oil billionaire. Ross Perot. He actually was in charge of Texas education for a long time. He's why we have STAR test, actually.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, that's Ross Perot. All right, so.
Why does that
I don't know. So these three guys are going to run for president at once.
Hey, Zizi, we actually get the starter.
He's one of the people who pushed for testing because he was like, his idea was like people are going to school. We don't know if they're qualified because some schools were just graduating kids just graduated, and some schools were tough, like making sure kids learn things. So they thought that the STAR test would show whether you're actually learning something and qualified to get the degree, but it kind of turned into something where a lot of schools, that's all they think about all day.
Do they go the same for universities?
No. Well, it depends. It depends. If you need a certification, and I mean, you take teacher tests, and like I had to take several. Like I took one to get my master's degree in history, right? I had to take a 2-day test, and they were both 6 hours each, and it was just writing essays the whole time off the top of my head. And that was so. And then when I took my education degree, I had to take some certification tests, right? But yeah, it's like, so you do it in college. Like if you were going to be something like a licensed counselor, you'd have to go to college and then take the counseling certification test stuff. So so yeah, you got to do it. You got to do something like that. But hey, Ross Perot is going to enter as a third-party candidate, and he's going to take what was going to be a certain victory for President Bush and give it to Clinton, because he's going to divide and pull away Republican votes. And they're going to be like, you know what? I guess I don't like this guy. You make more sense, because he was talking about stuff like the fiscal irresponsibility of the government. He's like, government spends too much money, and you're going to run us into debt, and it's going to cause the country to collapse. And people are like, whoa, really? Well, okay, that's not good. And so they're going to be like, well, this guy's spending left and right, so we'll go with you. However, the Democrats just stuck with Democrat candidate. And so he's going to pull in all those electoral college votes he needs. So that's kind of like how, remember Lincoln won, or remember Woodrow Wilson. Teddy Roosevelt split his party, so Woodrow Wilson, who was like largely unheard of, came in for the victory. So third-party candidates always mix things up. All right, so in 1992 election, during the Republican primaries, I remember this. I remember being in like middle school when all this was going on. The Republican primaries, Bush was chided by his own party for breaking his promises and raising taxes in America. That was his original saying, was read my lips, no new taxes. Well, he made some big taxes, so he was lying, right? So his own party was mad at him. His troubles were worsened by the entrance to the race by a third-party candidate billionaire named Ross Perot. Perot siphoned away many of Bush's potential voters by calling for fiscal responsibility at the federal level. He's like, look at this guy. He's spending left and right. We got to stop that, right? Oh, yeah, okay, sounds good. This divided Republican Party opened the door for an unlikely victor, the governor of Arkansas and Democrat presidential candidate Bill Clinton. Clinton won the presidency with only 43% of the popular vote, because remember, it split three ways. But he had 370 electoral votes to Bush's 168. So he had the most electoral college votes, and he got it. So he came in, and so now Perot, though, he will come out to be America's most popular third-party candidate, not even close to winning the presidency. So it goes to show you can bring in a message. And so like his message was about fiscal responsibility. And so that made Bush have to campaign on it. But people were like, well, you lied. You said you were going to do that. But who else did it? Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton said the same thing. He's like, well, I'm also going to rein in government spending. And so, which is smart because that was like the spirit of the age. Both parties wanted to kind of fix that. And so he managed to pull in for a win. I think we got one more after this. And so though, even though Bill Clinton was an unlikely president, we're going to see when he runs for re-election, he's going to be much more popular then and well known.
Wait, this one, was Barack Obama elected as president in his 40s?
I think so. He was kind of young when he first came into office.
And he's still young, right?
He doesn't look young. Usually when those guys get out of the presidency, they look old and withered. It seems to age you.
No.
How old was Obama
He had lived in the United States for 35 years.
when he was,
Yeah.
So you can run for president.
one of the things said, how old was Obama when he was born? Okay. It's like, what? Okay. He was 47.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was 47.
He's 47?
He was when he became president.
He's 59. Dang, he's my grandmother.
Yeah, when he became president. But yeah, he looks like being president. I think it does it on all of them. It's supposed to be stressful. All right.
You did
So-
look good.
And, on the, I think the two nice looking good presidents are, what's it called? What's his name? I think everybody else. I forgot his name. The one that was assassinated.
Oh, Kennedy.
Kennedy
Yeah.
looked really good. And Barack Obama.
Now, that's the thing. A lot of people compared during the campaign Clinton to JFK because kind of like JFK, he was young. Like Clinton was really young when he first got in politics. We'll see that in a second. And he was good at speaking, right? Like he would, like on his campaign, he would play the saxophone. But like JFK, he also had scandals with like adultery and stuff from like back in the day where like you'd see women like in the governor's office and stuff. So he kind of had that background like JFK. Let's go to the last one of the day. So this is Clinton with his vice president, Bob Dole. And we're going to see Dole again later when he runs against Bush Jr. So, of course, he's not going to win that one, as you probably know. All right, so last one, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had an early start in politics as he went from attorney general. That's like the lead like prosecutor for a state. And they can help with state's defense if you go to court in Arkansas. And then he became the state's governor at the age of 32. He was the youngest governor in the nation at the time. I don't know if there's been anybody younger than that. Like that's young, 32 years old. With his and he's from an Ivy League school, but most of these guys are from Ivy League schools. With his youth and character, Clinton attracted many voters. Tired the rigid and formal style, not still, that's a typo, of George H.W. Bush. Yeah, so Bush Sr. was seen as kind of like he was very formal, like people didn't think he was very funny, whereas like Bill Clinton would like crack jokes and stuff like that. So he's more of a people's person, and that can really help you become like get into office, right? If you got some of that charisma. So let me fix that there. And so, like Bush, Clinton promised to cut taxes, and like Perot, he promised to reduce the federal deficit. See, when Ronald Reagan was trying to fix the budget, he cut social programs. Bush, however, didn't cut anything. He kept the military big and the social programs big. And so that's why like the federal debt was climbing and climbing and climbing, and why he felt like he had to raise taxes to keep it all together. And so people were tired of it. So, like Bush, President Clinton failed to cut taxes, but instead raised taxes on upper income individuals and corporations in order to offset the federal budget. So he raised taxes on the rich, essentially, in the most partisan bill in half a century. So this is the first time, either since World War II or before that, where you only had one party for a vote. So no Republicans voted for this tax increase. So that's pretty partisan. Usually you're going to have at least a couple of people from the other side. And so what we're seeing here is because of this partisanship, you're going to see the underdogs at the time, the Republicans, start going through changes. And you're going to see the growth of somebody we'll talk about later called Newt Gingrich, right? And so now people are like, well, you can't raise taxes. And they also didn't like the nature of it because a lot of individuals believe that if you tax businesses, they're going to hire less people, it's going to hurt jobs and things like that. So he then continued the work of his predecessor, Bush, in order to help pass the North American Free Trade Agreement. And so this is called NAFTA. This had to do between our borders with trade, relations with one another, and like allowing things like truck drivers from one country be able to go through another without restrictions and things like that. So some people protested this because they thought it hurt their jobs within the country, like truck drivers, for instance. Whereas others were like, well, this could lower the price of goods, like we were talking about. Competition leads to lower prices of what you get. So that's going to do it for today. I need to change that typo. It didn't catch it because it's a word. That's not the right word. All right. Oh yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wait till well, no, I'm going to go ahead and save it now. I'm going to go ahead and post this on the Google Classroom, but then I'm going to update it one up later. All right, kids. See y'all Tuesday.